Welcome, Emma Slade.
Nice to be here.
Thank you for joining me today, Emma. So, Emma, you quite some time ago changed from art, which you'd studied, and we will come back to that, and went into banking and became a successful financial analyst. Some years ago, when on business in Jakarta, you were held at gunpoint. And dealing with the subsequent trauma of that experience and learning to recover, which took time, led you to examine your life and make some very fundamental changes. But take me to that point and the change that you felt after that in the short term.
You mean in terms of having a gun at your head?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think if you experience that, obviously you're going to probably think about your life, like the meaning of your life, that, whether your life is going to end at this precise moment, whether you're going to be comfortable leaving the world feeling you've done what you wanted to do. And so I think, in that moment, particularly in the very early stages of the being held at gunpoint, I think, there was no space for pretense anymore. There's no space for kind of, oh, I've got years and years to work it out, or kind of this doesn't really matter, or, that kind of like, well, I can do this for a while because it doesn't really matter because in the end I'll do what I really want to do. There's some kind of, very there's no space, there's one moment left. It felt like there was one moment left. And in that moment I had to think, is this what I want my life to have been? Yeah. So I think when you come up against one of those moments, like some kind of granite mountain face, it's just like a complete emergency stop. You probably do experience some pretty deep thoughts, but it took me quite a long time after that incident and that particular moment in the incident for things to fully change and to materialize. So it was kind of a
What was
moment.
the feeling you had at that moment? What name would you give the feeling? Was it extreme fear? Was it something else?
I think it was, obviously it was intense fear, absolutely intense fear. Yeah. And kind of not exactly regret, but some kind of thing like around that. And also really like, not exactly an anger, but a kind of like, no, I don't want to die yet. No, I still want to be alive. I do not want my life to end at this point. Remember, I was still pretty young, right? And so, there's just like, no, I still want to be alive. And so often we feel very ambiguous about being alive, don't we? We feel it's a burden, it's very difficult. It seems like something that is hard to traverse. But at that moment, it's like, no, I just want to remain alive. And but obviously my life was not really in my own hands at that point because I didn't know what this guy was going to do. And, so didn't know how it was going to work out.
So over time, because that was a bit of a massive experience to say the
Yeah.
very least,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and, and a life-changing experience in many ways and on multiple levels. Over time, I guess as you rebuilt yourself and recovered, you had a great desire, I guess, to, look at the deeper aspects of humanity and human life and the meaning of human life. And I know you explored yoga, meditation, Buddhism came into your life. Tell me about that.
I mean, I would say that sounds very impressive, like wanted to study humanity and da 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 da, right? I mean, I don't think I thought about it in those terms. It was just very simple in terms of for my life, the time I have, the path forward. What do I want to do with that time, and how to be peaceful and feel that I've made a contribution and I haven't been a purely selfish being. And so it was a very small project just for me. It wasn't like to study the whole of humanity or, It was, I've been through this thing. It's totally changed my priorities. It's also given me this sense that being alive is not to be taken for granted. It's like some kind of incredible thing. And on that basis now, what do I choose to do? Where do I want my attention to lie? And I stumbled over yoga, which I think is the most wonderful and profound thing. And probably my first experience of what we in the West might call body, mind, spirit. That sense of something really holistic, that sense of something beyond surface activity or surface possessions, and a sense of stillness and profound states of being. So I have a great gratitude for yoga, because I think if that hadn't come in, it could have been harder to know what to do with those wishes, those aspirations for seeking and wanting to ask deeper questions. If yoga hadn't come in and kind of fed that inquiry, I guess I could have got a bit disillusioned, a bit nihilistic, or I don't know what, because when you let something go, like I was letting a lot of things go,
Was that a struggle to let those things go?
No, it wasn't at all. Because of Jakarta, I'd kind of seen right through them. It was actually pretty easy to drop them. But when you let something go, which takes courage, and you give yourself a space in which for something else to appear. And I was just really lucky that yoga kind of came in and held me through that period of reforming and questioning. If it hadn't come in, I guess I could have ended up lost, or in some other way, like disillusioned. I could have ended up cynical or bitter, or so, I don't know, some other kind of path could have arisen, right? But because of
With
yoga,
other emotions, right?
Yeah, because of yoga, I think it supported me for that in some of the changes and the inquiries.
At what point did Buddhism, enter that frame of reference for you?
I would say that actually I was interested in Buddhism right in the beginning of my life, even as a child. So that was always like a little river in the background. But growing up in Southeast England in the 1970s, like my mum gave me a book about Buddhism when I was about 11, and the house I was born into had a lying Buddha in it, which I still have now. It's on my shrine. But it wasn't easy to access stuff like it is today. There wasn't like Google and internet and Buddhist teachings all over the place, and et cetera, et cetera. So it had just run along like a little flavor in the background. But with doing more profound aspects of yoga and then doing more meditation, I think what really interested me, I got to spend some time in a Buddhist monastery in Europe, and it was the compassion practices that they did. It's a practice called Chenrezig, and you may know their mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. And that, the compassion practices, and it may be that I just don't know enough about yoga, but the compassion practices really spoke to me, and they were something that I hadn't felt so fully encountered in the yoga practices. And that, for me, felt incredibly profound. I found it just incredibly moving that these monastics in this temple were doing these compassion practices for all beings.
How do you translate what you just said? The words. What does it translate literally as in English?
What, Om Mani Padme Hum?
Yeah.
Oh, Om Mani Padme Hum. Well, it's the direct translation is quite tricky. Some people say it means the jewel in the lotus, but I think with a lot of these things, it's better sometimes to think of a feeling. Like, so if you think about a feeling of profound, non-judgmental compassion for all beings, if you think about being in the presence of that feeling, you think of being in the presence of that feeling, that's a better way rather than asking what is the literal interpretation, right? Because it's
Understood.
beyond these
Because it's a
conceptual
feeling, right?
words.
It's not just words or a
Yeah,
narrative. And Emma, when you discovered that over a period of time, how did you feel about yourself? How did you feel differently about your lens on life and your engagement with the world around you?
I guess it just provided a much larger landscape to be part of.
Right.
That's the only way I can describe it, like a feeling finally part of a greater woven fabric. Yeah, it was a way of being part of things for me.
So when you had that experience, sometimes we can have a profound experience, which can be life changing at a very, very fundamental level. And then, we're back in life, we're back in the world, we're back in our home,
Yeah, good point.
we're back
Yeah.
in central, wherever we are, right? And hopefully we take some of it with us, but we can get knocked around in that sort of real life situation. How did that stay with you? How did you help give continuity to that experience?
Yeah, I guess that's where we have to hope that conditions come to support us, to keep us going, isn't it? And I was lucky. I got the opportunity to meet a lot of teachers, and then eventually I got to go to Bhutan. And in Bhutan, I happened to, stumble across this monk who turned out to be a lama, and he became my teacher. So I think a lot of conditions continue to support me. A little bit like a plant. Like you say, you might plant a very interesting seed in soil, but if you don't continue to water it or have sunshine for it, it will die. It's uncared for, right? So these other things need to come in to help it. And I was lucky that those things came in.
And do you think that meeting in Bhutan, tell me about that chance, in inverted commas, meeting with the Lama? I mean, do you believe in chance?
Well, from a Buddhist point of view, obviously we have this strong feeling of karma, and that, there are patterns running endlessly through time, some of which we can see, some of which become obvious to us, some of which are less obvious. But so that does change, I guess, this idea of sort of random chance, to a little bit. So yeah, it's meeting him in his temple, Dochala in Bhutan, was definitely a very profound moment. I mean, not dissimilar to Jakarta in the sense that it had that feeling of cutting through something that went right to the heart of everything. Like it just, all the fluff and the daily debris kind of fell away. So it sort of had in a strange kind of way, they both had that level of impact.
And subsequently, I believe in 2014, you were ordained a Buddhist nun in the Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan. Obviously, that must have been a very special and unique moment for you. And it is for, I think, the wider world, frankly, because you were the first and only Western woman to be ordained. And with this beautiful name, I love this name, Annie Pema Deki. Is that correctly pronounced? Or did I pronounce that?
Annie means nun.
Okay.
Yeah, Annie just means nun. So any female looking like this, you can easily call Annie and you won't be wrong. Pema Deki, Pema, from its origins in Sanskrit, Padma means lotus, like Padma Sambhava or Padmasana, the yoga posture. And then Deki means very blissful. So very happy, very joyful.
How hard is it to live up to that name?
Well, these names are given to aspire to, isn't it? So, gosh, I'm doing my best, but failing many times.
Right. And Emma, you're also a mother to your wonderful son. What epiphany has motherhood brought to you, if there were anything that you would reference?
Oh my goodness. I mean, motherhood is just like this enormous profound, a life-changing experience. I mean, it's another beyond
Right.
words thing, isn't it?
Totally.
And it unfolds. You can't know how it's going to be. You can't know what this child that comes into your life is going to be like. You're not in control of it. You suddenly have this mystery unfolding, which tests your, presses your buttons and tests your assumptions, because this other creature is there, and they're going to, you have to see what comes up. You can imagine how your child would be, how you want them to be, but you're dealing with clay or something. It's not all in your control. They have their own thing going
You can
on.
say that again.
So I just think it's a very extraordinary experience, and fundamentally changes your attitude to all humans, I think, actually. Just because you think, I can remember just, holding Oscar as a young baby and walking past people who were lost or homeless or clearly in trouble, and just thinking, each of them at some point, had a mother that
100%.
gave birth to them and cared for them. And you see that little child in everybody. And, it's just, it does change how you see other humans.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, because everyone is the child of someone at the end of the day, right? And you realize that. I think, I'm the mother of 2 university students, and I concur fully with what you're saying. And I think that there is something very fundamental in human life, and when it's, your child, it puts a different lens on literally everything, every aspect of life, every interconnection. How does your son engage with what he sees of you? I mean, because obviously you're his mum, so you're probably just mum to him, but has your path been a massive influence on him in terms of his outlook and so forth?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's changed, So he was with me in Bhutan when I was ordained in Pinokazong, as you mentioned. He was with me. He wasn't in the room, but he was down the corridor. Now, he was 5 at that point. So he's a 5-year-old in the Himalayan kingdom of Bhutan, being cared for by monks in one room. And down the corridor, his mum is being fully ordained. And not fully ordained, get Summa vows, is the highest vows that women can hold in Bhutan. But in that room, and I don't think he can really remember me any other way, to be honest. And he's had moments of being very proud of me and thinking I'm super cool and unlike the other mums. And he's had moments of saying things like, Mama, you're never going to get a handbag like the other mums at school. And, these moments are kind of like, oh, so because children, they have moments of really wanting to fit in and wanting you to be identical to everybody else. And then they have moments of thinking, no, it's really cool not to be identical with everyone else. And they kind of go back and forward.
Which is completely normal, isn't it, in their childlike ecosystem as they evolve. As I often say, most people spend the first half of their life trying to conform, and the second half finding a path to identify the fact that they are entirely unique. How does... Referencing the handbag, if we may momentarily, we are in a over-consuming universe in some respects. Despite all the references to the environment and what we're doing to the planet, obviously a massive theme right here, right now, with COP and so forth. And, more and more people who perhaps were raging consumers, paring back, recycling, buying less, buying better, sharing more, upcycling what they have, and so forth. What does your son see in how you live around that? Because obviously children are subjected to consumption, aren't they? Out in the school, in the playground, with their friends, etc. How have you managed that with him, given your choices in life?
Well, obviously he's seen me live relatively simply, and he knows that's how we've chosen to live. He, as a young boy now, he's 15 now, so he has trainers and clothes, and he has a huge range of things that I don't have personally, So I think I haven't, I can't make him into some kind of mini monk. He's not a monk. He's a 15-year-old boy in the West, but he is very aware of greed. There are different states of mind, different sufferings of mind in the Buddhist way of thinking about things: pride, jealousy, desire, and one of them is greed, and it's called the hungry ghost realm. Because it's never satisfied. It's a state of being continually unsatisfied by what you have and wanting more. And he's very quick to say, if I say something like, oh, I'd like something, I don't know what, he was very quick to say, Mum, is that not the hungry ghost realm? So he teases me, he's like my little
I love that.
watchman,
I
you know
love
what I
it.
mean? And yeah, so it's very, I think it takes time for people to become content with just kind of enough, and not to see that as a lesser way of living or some kind of sacrifice. To be comfortable with it, really comfortable with it, I think maybe takes time. Otherwise, people think it's like a reduced way of living, a lesser way of living. You know what I mean? But a lot of the franticness and the distractedness and the unhappiness seems to be linked to not being able to just be peacefully content with just a simple way of living, And so I do recommend it, but it's not
Well,
so easy to
it's
do,
an
maybe.
adjustment and it's a choice. And, choice requires practice, right? You can make a choice in your head, but how do you live that? How do you live that each day? How do you live it when you don't feel like living it, right? It brings up all those questions. I mean, that makes me think about happiness, which we were talking about earlier. And you are the subject of a short film, Happiness, which is part of the Compassion Matters, a project from the Dalai Lama Center for Compassion. What is your personal understanding of happiness?
Well, it's a big question you just asked there, but maybe very simply. So we have one small prayer, yeah? May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. So we have to ask ourselves, what causes happiness? And from a Buddhist point of view, happiness is caused by mentally being free of the states of suffering. So being less angry, less greedy, less proud, less jealous, the mind then becomes easier, more flexible, calmer. It's just more settled. It's not so agitated and unhappy in a way. And so it's largely, at the end of the day, about reaching a state of ease with your own mind. And that means not just meditating, that means being aware of how you interact with others, what you do, what you say, whether you're causing harm. It's not just about meditating, it's about living in a way which means your mind at the end of the day is peaceful, is not agitated, is not suffering.
It's very interesting what you say. And given the recent history of the world with COVID and the suffering that people have experienced, people have experienced a lot of struggle, right? Even people who've perhaps been spared extreme illness, but there's been a lot of psychological and emotional struggle. What advice would you give to people who are trying to escape the prison of themselves, in a way, the sort of prison of self, I would call it, where they are struggling, where they are having difficulty quietening their mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult question because these general statements can be quite tricky. I find when I talk to one person, it's like You've got a basic cup of tea, but then you may need to just put a little bit of ginger in for some person, or with somebody you need some chamomile. So these general statements are tricky, I would say. First of all, from a Buddhist point of view, the root of suffering is wishing things to be other than how they are. Now, that's a big statement. Again, it's a very general statement. But I think some level of realizing this is the situation. This is the situation with COVID, and we're doing our best. This is the situation. I know it's not like, I know things aren't like they were before. Things may not be like we want them to be, but some general kind of, okay, this is the situation. This is the reality right now, first of all. And I would just encourage anybody to think what really helps them and what really doesn't help them. Like, I think I've spoken to a lot of people who've said they've stopped watching the news, or they've really stepped back from media because they found it was really adding to their agitation and their worry and their fear and etc. And they couldn't do anything about it. So it wasn't really helping anything. So I think, first of all, if you feel like something is really adding to your negative state of mind, then have the courage to limit it or step away from it. And then really look at what nourishes you. And I know it can be difficult in these situations. Not everybody has a garden, not everybody has a pet, not everybody has a family member or a good friend that they can spend time with. But without judgment, without thinking that those things are somehow hobbies or less valuable, the things that help us feel kind and calm and in touch and positive, whatever they are, please don't write them off as somehow irrelevant time or just a hobby or relaxing in that way that we used to think about those terms. Really see them as these really essential core things to being an okay human, and do them deliberately, as much as you can within the situation you find yourself. And I just hope everybody has something like that when they think about it, something that helps them, and then has the capacity to do that for whatever it is, half an hour, 5 minutes.
With consistency, right? And just giving it the recognition and the value it needs. Because I think as well, to your point about distraction, people are distracted. There are so many things that can impact and impinge upon the human body, the human mind, that aren't necessarily always constructive, that can make people feel extremely unsettled. And doing those little things very, very often on a regular basis can help one recalibrate. I guess as well, this year and a half has been a time of massive change for lots of people. And obviously, Emma, you've had a lot of change in your life. You've experienced a lot of change. And you have said change requires some courage. It takes enormous courage to step into the unknown. As we know, many people fear change, although personally I feel the essence of life implies change. There is change going on all the time, right? Whether it's of our doing or not, that is actually life, perhaps we could say. What would you just say to someone who, is fearful of navigating uncertainty into the unknown?
Well, there are degrees. We have to be wise and skillful with our own being. There are degrees. I think from my experience of talking to people, that if people get to a stage of feeling very stuck, either with their own thinking, their own mental habits, or just generally their situation, they feel very disempowered and they feel like they're not really living. It's like a state of being half alive if you feel very stuck, right? And it's very disempowering. And so I think this is where, choosing to do things that are helpful for you, even if they're little changes, they don't have to be big changes. But if it gives that feeling that I'm not stuck, I'm working with the nature of things. Things are changing and flowing, and I'm also growing and changing and flowing. It's just when we have this feeling that the outer world is stuck and we are stuck, then things get very, very tricky, I think. Sometimes big change may be helpful, and you may have the courage to do that, but sometimes we just need to make little changes. And like right now, people are quite stressed with COVID a lot of the time. Some people have made radical changes. It has, they've moved to the country, they've changed jobs. I don't know what. I think you have to have some self-wisdom, maybe in a quiet time, just to think, okay, is this a time to make a small change? And if so, what? Is it a time to make a medium-sized change? Or is it time to make a big change? But for some people, making a big change will give a feeling of fear. And so then we respect that and make a
following
medium-sized
intuition
change.
as well, isn't it, really? Sitting with yourself.
I think we are, yeah. And if you can, I think that usually gives a feeling of trust, that you can rely on your own wisdom. Nobody else can quite tell you if the size of the change. I think it's good if you can sense it for yourself, because it also gives you a feeling of trust in your own, walking down that path, that you can be your own best guide. And I think that's important, because often we look around find in everybody else or every book or whatever, or every teacher, what to do. Sometimes it's better to be quiet and just think and reflect, and then gently make that change.
And Emma, today in your life, you're very active internationally, if I may say. You're an acclaimed author with your best-selling book Set Free, which tells your extraordinary story from banking to Buddhism in some ways. You're a public speaker. You've given an inspirational TED Talk, which has been listened to hundreds of thousands of times. You are a coach. You are running your retreats. And you are the founder and CEO of the charity Opening Your Heart to Bhutan, which works with children with special needs in local communities and empowers those communities. And you've been recognised by the UK Prime Minister with the Point of Light Award for your work. Tell me about where you are today and how you bring your original skills. So you're not only a financier by training, but you previously, post-studying at Cambridge University, gained one of only 2 first-class honours degrees in fine art awarded at Goldsmiths, University of London, the other one being Steve McQueen, no less. How do you bring all that to your work today?
Well, making a positive contribution in the world, particularly with the charity, is very important to my integrity, my sense of integrity, that I'm not just doing prayers for compassion, but I'm actually taking compassionate action. That has been a very important thing for me personally. And I think that's probably because I didn't feel that it was always easy for me to be kind. It was pretty easy for me to be selfish in the early part of my life to a certain degree. So I think I have gained the greatest kind of internal peace of mind setting up my charity and helping those children. It's been, very important for me. They think I'm helping them, but it's not really that way around. Or it helps me. I help them. It's kind of a wonderful thing in that way. I do a lot of things in the world. I'm not sure if the next couple of years I'll do so many things in the world. I've done quite a lot. I suspect that the next few years will be less like that.
Why is that?
I have practices to do. I have my meditation practices to do, and one of my teachers in Bhutan said, even at the end of the day, something really wonderful like the charity is still involved with worldly activity. So for a monastic, a renunciate, then you have to be very careful around worldly activity, how much you're really involved in it and how much you can skillfully involved in it without your mind getting too excited or too hot or too cold, So
Totally. I suspect in your case as well, given your you've probably brought to your work your creative mind. You've probably brought your financial acumen, right? Because running a charity is also like running a business in some respects, right? So, and that can engender certain feelings too, in a way, of engagement and involvement and excitement, because you did have a very fascinating career at a point in your life.
Yeah, so I think whilst I am not going into long periods of solitary retreat at this point because of Oscar, etc., my son, I think I suspect the next year or so will be a little bit quieter. And I'm doing, I do my daily practice, and I've also, strangely enough, you mentioned my art thing. I have been doing a few artistic things as well, and with the, I've studied Tibetan now quite hard, even though I'm still pretty useless at it, but, certain mantras. And so I may do some creative things around those in a more artistic way. Yeah, it's the most important thing. I mean, it's very important to make a contribution, and it's very important to have a as pure as possible sense of purpose in this life, which is not tinged by anger. And most difficult situations in the world may bring up anger in us. Like I could be very upset that there are children with special needs out there. I could be very upset that there isn't enough medical facilities, or like. And I know different people have different responses to this. They see suffering in the world and it makes them very angry. From a monastic point of view, that's not really an option. Anger as a response to suffering is not an option. It could be for other people involved in other areas, but for monastics, not an option, right? So it's very good to participate and help in the world, make a contribution, and know how meaningful your life can be in terms of helping others. But there are profound meditation practices which are about understanding not only a stable mind, but the nature of the mind itself. And it's important I have enough time to explore those. Yeah. So I'm just saying that might be a bit more of the future.
Understood. And I think you touched on the very big and very important word of purpose. I think today, in business, certainly, and it wasn't the case, I think, when we started our careers a long time ago, but today in business and all aspects of life, people talk about purpose, underpinning their choices, underpinning their motivations, underpinning, which company they join, etc., etc. How can people find their purpose today, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, there's a quote by Goenka about the Buddhist teacher Goenka, Burmese teacher Goenka, about what is right livelihood. And in a way, purpose is a little bit like, what is right livelihood? What is the way to live rightly in this world? Which is one of the 8 aspects of the Noble Path. And he says, if you are taking activity which both supports yourself and is helping others, then you're living in a right way. And so we do have to have that balance, both recognizing that we should take care of our own being in every way, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, etc., and always be helping others. And if you can get to the end of the day and think, yeah, I gently took care of myself today, I didn't harm myself with my anger or my speech towards others. I didn't harm myself in that way, and I helped others. Then you can rest easy knowing that, that is the purpose. There is no other purpose. Because sometimes you can search for purpose here, there, and everywhere. But I think for me anyway, I don't know how it sounds to you, Dee, but in that simple way, I think that
totally, it's what you said
provides
is very beautiful
area.
and very simple and very profound. And I think we can overcomplicate and almost have a roadblock because we're looking for some bigger story. But it's a life choice. It's a day-to-day choice, isn't it? It's a minute-to-minute walking down a certain road with a certain approach and a certain philosophy, which is intrinsic to who we are as human beings. It's about, the inside reflecting the outside as well, and I think there is a lot of, I'm a linguist by training, and I think there's a lot of language around sense of self, and there are a lot of, what I would call sort of slightly faux self-help, concepts out there. But what we're talking about here is something in a way profoundly simple and beautiful and much more fundamental in terms of choice about how one lives one's life. And it reminds me, we do have choices, don't we? Sometimes, we feel we never have a choice, but we do have agency over our own lives and some of the choices that we make, which are quite fundamental as to how we live. Emma, tell me, today, what is your biggest concern in the world, if there were one?
Oh, that we still very easily harm other beings all the time. We don't think it's, you look across the globe, people are fighting each other, killing animals. The basic root of yoga and Buddhism is ahimsa, not to harm. And I think I see that in so many situations, there's no understanding that just please don't harm. And that, if that was truly taken to heart, then I think many things would be solved that simple way.
Do you ever feel hopeless about that point? Because it has, in some respects, always been thus. And sometimes the greatest inhumanity, for want of a better word, is humans towards humans. In the animal kingdom, yes, animals will defend themselves or defend their young, but they won't randomly attack one another just for the sake of it. And, if we look back historically, we've always had war, we've always had conflict. It doesn't seem to be improving. How does that make you feel more broadly when you look at this as a big concern?
It doesn't make me feel hopeless, but it does make me wish to be a good example of not being like that, if I can, if it's not easy. I guess I wish there was some global commitment just not to harm, like maybe even
Wouldn't
just
that be
one
incredible?
day,
Like just one day?
One day, and there's so many of these
put arms
days,
down,
one day, and
be kind to other people actively.
Yeah.
But I love that.
Wherever in the world, a day of non-harm, if people all committed on that day not to harm any other being, and then see how that felt at the end of the day,
that would be incredible.
How that felt. Yeah.
I think we might have to get working on that. I'm going to have to sort of distract you and bring you to work on that one with me. So Emma, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to ask you one final question. Obviously, you are a teacher to many, and you get asked a lot of questions about big themes in life. What is the subject or the question that you get asked the most, and what is your response to that? Bearing in mind that everyone is different and there are micro shifts depending on the person and so forth.
I think in the West, obviously, I get asked a lot why I have no hair, why I look like this, because there isn't a culture of understanding what is it to be a Buddhist monastic. right? So in the West, I particularly get asked about, those sorts of things. I definitely get asked about meditation. What is meditation? A lot of people feel they have to apologize to me. Like they say, I'm really sorry I tried meditation. It was just really hard. I couldn't do it. I gave it up, So that's a common question. What is meditation? And like, why is it so difficult? That kind of thing. I think people often find it helpful to share their difficulties. I find people often very easily want to share the difficulties that they've had as a human, just to be listened to. I think that, I don't know if it's because we're living very fast, or I don't know what, but there's a need to be listened to share the difficulty of human existence out loud to another being that you feel comfortable around, or you feel that they're going to honor your human experience. I think that's, often something that happens as well. And that's broadly speaking, I think a lot of what goes on. Yeah.
Beautiful. Emma, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been very special.
Oh, no problem. Yeah. Hope it's been helpful.
It really has, and it's been very special for me on a personal level. Thank you so much, and I hope to hear more soon.
Good. Day of harming, a day of non-harming. We have to bring that in. Yes, that'll be the...
Seriously, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emma.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Double Espresso with D, with me, D Sterling. If you enjoyed it, I'd love you to review and subscribe to the podcast so we can share these amazing stories with others. I'd also love to connect with you, so feel free to contact me via Instagram DM at D Double Espresso. Until the next time, au revoir.